I'll turn it over now to Brianne, I believe. And Brianne is going to introduce our second speaker, who's probably sorry that she ever met us, because everybody I know is going to Deborah and asking her to come to their event. So, but Deborah, thanks so much for taking time. Ron, I'm going to step down.
All right, good morning. Deborah Phillips is here, and as Ron mentioned, we had a lot of opportunities throughout the process to learn from other industries that have gone before us and done this well, and the chemical industry is a great example of that. And so we've asked Deborah to come and talk today. Deborah is the Vice President for Responsible Care and Value Chain Outreach at the American Chemistry Council here in D.C. She oversees the Responsible Care Initiative in the U.S. chemical industry, which is what she'll talk about today. And she also serves as the Secretariat of the International Council of Chemical Associations Responsible Care Leadership Group. So she works a lot with the international organizations and responsible care around the world, not just in the U.S. Prior to joining ACC in 2000, she was an environmental health and safety consultant. She has a master's in environmental toxicology from Duke University and an undergraduate degree in biology from Albright College. Please welcome Deborah Phillips.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I get the opportunity from time to time to sort of share the chemical industry story around performance programs. My duties now also include value chain outreach, so it's kind of a perfect place for me to be with you today. For those of you that haven't heard about Responsible Care, it's a chemical industry initiative. It's an environment, health, safety, and security performance program. Been around for about 30 years now. So it's kind of a broad-based program. It includes many, many disciplines, not just safety, environmental issues, community outreach, emergency response and planning. It has its roots in stakeholder engagement. Community outreach was one of the first codes under Responsible Care, so bringing in perspectives from stakeholders is an important part of the legacy of the program. We think it has a history of also reducing operating costs because it allows organizations to operate more efficiently, and it's sort of at the American Chemistry Council, we're an advocacy organization, and I think we're a little bit unique in having a mandatory performance program like Responsible Care, but we really think that it enhances our ability to advocate on behalf of our industry. When we're in public policy debates, having a program like Responsible Care that all of our companies subscribe to, and we can say, here's what we believe in with respect to environment, health, and safety, it provides us the opportunity to be a better advocate for our industry. As I mentioned, the Responsible Care program is a condition of membership at ACC, so all of our member companies, we've got about 180, have to implement Responsible Care. I'll talk about the specific elements of the program here in a minute. We also have a Responsible Care partnership program. So companies that aren't chemical manufacturers but are involved in the chemical supply chain, they're distributors, they're transporters, rail companies, third-party logistics providers can also come into the program and implement Responsible Care. The benefit there is that they can say to their customers, hey, we believe in the same things you do and we implement the same program. So that expands Responsible Care's reach here in the U.S. to an additional 100 companies or so. So we've got about 280 companies practicing the program. It includes a mandatory environment, health, and safety and security management system. So it's really, pretty broad in terms of the scope. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the management system, kind of how it operates and what it is here in a minute. There's a strong CEO oversight component to our program. We have a board, our ACC's board of directors is about 50 CEOs, and about a dozen serve on a specific board committee on Responsible Care, chaired by Chuck Anderson, CEO of OxyChem. And this group of dozen CEOs meets 3 times a year and dedicates itself to Responsible Care and the oversight of the program. Also, we require the CEOs of each of our organizations to sign Responsible Care guiding principles. So we really feel like top-line leadership commitment demonstrated through a public commitment process really sort of adds something to the program that, again, I'll talk about here more in a minute. In addition to our board committee on Responsible Care, we have an active working level committee, director, vice president level folks that meet probably 6 times a year to really talk about the day-to-day management of the program. Each of our 300 companies that implement responsible care also have to have a responsible care point of contact. We call them the responsible care coordinator. We're in touch with them on a monthly basis. We have open calls, bring them together. Sometimes we have topics that we know we want to talk about. Other times we just say, hey, submit your topics. Let's hear from you. What's on your mind. So we try to really, and that sort of peer sharing is a part of the program that's been in place for 25 years now. And we really think it kind of brings strength because we can sort of find out what's on people's mind. We can get ahead of issues. If a company brings something up, it's generally of interest to many of our member companies, and we can kind of work on them together. So I mentioned this is just kind of a snapshot of who these 280 companies are. You'll see, the traditional sort of pure chemical companies like Dow, DuPont, BASF, petrochemical companies, ExxonMobil, Shell Chemical, Marathon Petroleum is a member of the ACC, Kinder Morgan is a member of the ACC through the partnership program. So you'll see, it's a pretty broad-based set of companies, which makes establishing a program like Responsible Care. It strengthens the program, but it also makes it challenging in terms of building consensus because each company kind of brings its own perspective, history, culture to the discussion. So, the Responsible Care program that I'll describe to you today is not the same as it was at its beginnings. Responsible Care has its origins in a disaster. Bhopal, there was a Union Carbide incident in Bhopal, India in 1984 that resulted in thousands of lives lost and injuries. It was really a wake-up call, I think, for the U.S. chemical industry. Many started looking for similar processes that were existing here in the States. I think companies felt like their license to operate was at risk. There was a heavy focus on what is the footprint of the chemical industry, what's the potential in terms of community impacts, particularly those living near facilities that had the same kind of processes that were existing at this Union Carbide plant in Bhopal. And around that same time, the Canadian chemical industry was already thinking about a community awareness and emergency response program called Responsible Care. And so as the executives started looking around for how can we restore public confidence in our industry, how can we preserve our license to operate, how can we demonstrate that we're going to do the right thing in the areas of process safety, emergency response, and community involvement in particular, they kind of looked at this program that was beginning in Canada and said, well, emergency response and community awareness is a good start, but we think we need to do things, in other areas as well. Process safety, occupational safety, pollution prevention. And so we started with a code-based program. Codes in each of those areas, a community awareness and emergency response code, a distribution code, a process safety code, an occupational safety code, and it was a set of best practices, kind of like a checklist. And we also started with companies self-assessing against the checklist. So each company on an annual basis would kind of evaluate itself, and say where they were in their process of implementing the practice. They either had it in place, they were developing it, or they hadn't begun yet. And we had 5-year timelines that we wanted companies to sort of be fully what we called practice in place within each of the codes. And it was self-reporting. ACC collected the information. We would compile it. But there was really no sort of hammer at the end of the day. We had companies that were kind of lingering in the developing a plan phase for a number of years. And so, in 1993, the program had been in place for 5 years. The codes were in place, and some CEOs were starting to get, nervous. Where is this going? What do we do with companies that are just not getting there? Do we really believe the self-reporting aspect of the program? And so we introduced a peer review process at the time, so that companies that weren't making progress or weren't doing a great job of reporting would get a peer review. So a peer company would go in and sort of say, hey, let us help you. It was a little bit of policing, but it was more sort of mutual assistance. Let us show you what we've done, and hopefully we can drive progress that way. So the program continued like that for another 10 years. And in the early 2000s, management systems became kind of front and center in terms of state-of-the-art of how you manage these kinds of issues. And we were still working in a siloed code approach. And so companies were saying, and companies that had been practice in place for years were kind of like, where do we go from here? We've got our, our practices checked off, but, it doesn't provide us a pathway for growth, a pathway for continuous improvement. So this strategic review process, which is what we do when we want to sort of reevaluate and make a fundamental change, resulted in sort of taking the codes and integrating them into a common management system. Around the same time, however, of this review and the decision to bring all the codes together into a single management system, September 11th happened, and there was a big focus around the security of chemical facilities being used as weapons of mass destruction. Responsible care codes were sort of a pathway that our companies understood, and so they said, well, let's create a new security code. Responsible care seems to be the way we get things done in our industry. Let's voluntarily create a security code. DHS wasn't created at that point. We felt like it was another opportunity for us to demonstrate leadership, so we created the security code. So since 2003, we've had an integrated management system and one code, which provides sort of an area of emphasis for companies, in a place where we think we need more specificity, more details, more granularity around requirements. And at that same time, we introduced mandatory third-party certification. This was probably the biggest change we've made to the program over the years. Telling companies that self-assessment wasn't good enough, peer review wasn't good enough, you had to hire auditors, much like was described this morning, to come in and audit your systems and determine if you were conforming with the requirements or you weren't. And if you're not conforming, you don't get a certificate, you can be removed from ACC membership. We also installed a governance process at that point that sort of described the actions that the disciplinary actions ACC would take, including removal from membership if companies sort of didn't do these things. And at the same time, we introduced mandatory performance reporting, so a set of indicators. It's about 15 indicators on a variety of environment, health, and safety measurements. Companies report it to us. We report it to the public. Mandatory. It had been voluntary up until that point. So big changes. And, there was a lot of consternation in the membership. Some companies, we had strong leaders. It felt like this is the way to go. This was the only way to keep the program viable and credible, but there were many companies that felt like they couldn't, this wasn't the proper role of a trade association. We were getting into their business, and they were going to leave the membership. So this was a rocky time for us in the program. But, I would say we lost a dozen companies around that time when we made these significant changes, but all of them have come back to ACC. Many of them left and sort of, watched to see what would happen. They're all back in the membership today. So, the program has carried on in almost that exact structure since 2003, until about 2 years ago, when again we sort of felt like, all right, we're sort of 10 years have passed. We want to take a fresh look at the program. So we instituted a strategic review process about 3 years ago, brought in an external stakeholder panel that worked with us for about a year. And they told us, so the Horizon Gulf oil spill happened during the gathering. I think it actually happened the day our stakeholder panel was together. So that launched a whole series of questions around process safety. So process safety was viewed as an area where we needed to retool. But their biggest issue for us was safety of chemical products. And this is probably, a little bit of a unique issue for the chemical industry, but the public debate around chemicals on our bodies, in the materials that we use, do we know what these chemicals do? Do we know what the health effects are? Do we know what the environmental effects are? Or is an issue that's really, hitting the chemical industry in a real way. And so our external stakeholders really challenged us to get much more specific about how we manage the safety of our products, how we understand where they're going in the supply chain. So process safety, product safety, the big two issues that came out of the last strategic review process. And in the end, we decided to create two new codes, a new process safety code, a new product safety code, to add specificity in those two areas. We also added within our management system some additional specificity on two other issues that we felt like we could just sort of incorporate into the structure of the management system: energy efficiency, and then waste minimization, reuse, and recycling. There was also sort of a view that we weren't as specific on those issues as we could be, so we added those in as well. So this just gives you a flavor for, retooling, keeping up with state of the art, keeping a program relevant. It's hard work. I know what it's like to be in the trenches with a group of people working. We were working for 3 years to retool the program, and it's hard, but to keep it robust and alive, I think it's vital. So today, the elements of responsible care, we have a set of guiding principles I mentioned. Each of our companies' CEOs sign our guiding principles. They're just sort of a vision of what we all believe in with respect to environment, health, and safety. There's a responsible care management system that companies must, their system must have the elements of our responsible care management system. They must go through third-party certification. So one piece that's a little bit unique, I think, about responsible care, we require certification at facilities on a 3-year basis, 1/3 of each company's facilities, plus headquarters. And that was a really that was a tough discussion too. Should headquarters get certified? Why would we certify headquarters? Facilities were used to getting certified, having inspections, but we decided to take it to headquarters too because we felt like there were vital functions dictated out of headquarters that needed to be looked at. And for the first 3 years of certification, I'll tell you, those were the toughest calls we got. From headquarters, senior executives, well, I don't want to talk to this auditor. But it actually made us better and got at functions that hadn't been audited before, like product safety, distribution in particular. Areas that were viewed as weak, I think, were strengthened because of that headquarters certification element. The 3 codes that are now in place, security, process safety, product safety, and performance reporting, these are the requirements for each of our companies. There are 2 pathways to certification. I know you probably can't read this. It's way too detailed. But the picture we're trying to create is there's 2 certification options for member companies. One called RCMS, Responsible Care Management System. The other is called RC 14001. We have a number of companies, about half of our members have customer requirements for ISO 14001, and they were having to go through that certification anyway. So we took the ISO 14001 standard, which deals with environmental issues, and added safety, security on top of it, health on top of it, so that it's the ISO 14001 framework plus all the other disciplines of responsible care. So companies that choose the RC 14001 pathway get 2 certificates at the end of their process, ISO 14001 and responsible care. We use external auditors. There's about a dozen auditing firms that are qualified. ACC sets the credentials, the training requirements, and then we have MOUs with ANAB, RAB, QSA for them to oversee the process. They actually go and oversee the auditors, make sure that they're auditing to the technical specifications and that their individuals are appropriately credentialed. So we stay one step away from the certification process. These are the performance indicators. There's, like I said, about 15. They fall in a variety of areas: energy, environment, process safety, occupational safety, distribution, product stewardship. This was controversial. We launched our public website where we take all of our company's data, and almost all of it we report out on a company-by-company basis. So it's an alphabetical listing of all of our companies, and here's their occupational safety rates. We also aggregate it for our membership, and I'll show you a chart to give you a feel for what we do with the aggregated. The aggregated data is actually very useful to ACC because we can turn that into talking points about the good things that our industry is doing in these areas. But the individual company data is really valuable to our members for benchmarking purposes. We create an individualized benchmarking report for each company so that they can see how they're doing on each of these indicators versus peers. It's not, they're just sent to the companies. We don't sort of, share them around, but it gives companies, an ability to really see how they're performing against the top quartile in their we break it down by size category. This is our occupational injury and illness chart. Goes back about 25 years or so. The top line is manufacturing sector as a whole. The red line is retail, a sector that nobody thinks injuries happen. The orange line is chemical companies overall, and the blue line is responsible care companies. So we try to sort of show ourselves versus the larger business of chemistry, larger manufacturing sector, and where there's public data available, if we can show how we're performing against industries that are generally viewed as safe, even better. So this, we're safer than 4 times safer than manufacturing. We're nearly 4 times safer than retail. So it really gives us a nice illustration of what we think the commitments of our companies really result in. This is process safety. I pulled this chart just because I think it's germane to your issues. There's no regulatory requirement for reporting process safety incidents. So we've had our own definition for a long time. I think that might change. We're hoping that might change. We're participating in the API 754 We use the 754 as a basis for our metric. When it was created, we kind of modified ours to keep up with state of the art, but we're hoping that this revision, RP 754 revision process, would result in a metric that we can all use, and we're really hoping the global community embraces it as well. But based on our reporting against that voluntary process safety metric, we had 281 process safety incidents, releases, injuries, fires, process-related events, 210 in 2012, and then we break it down by severity category. Level 1 being the most severe, level 4 being the least severe, and we really trying to focus on reducing incidents in those level 1 and level 2 categories. This is just sort of showing you the structure of our code. You'll see many of the headlines of the codes are very similar to the recommended practice your group has been working on. I've had the privilege of commenting on your document, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap. When we talk about management system, we have taken the Plan, Do, Check, Act and added policy on the top of it because we think policy sort of has to come first. There has to be a visible policy at the top. Policy, Plan, Do, Check, Act. And our codes generally follow that framework. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about the code, but I did want to sort of talk about how taking action can result in enhanced relationship with government, enhanced credit for performance. And with that, we've been able to do so much with our security code. By creating the code before DHS was created, before there were chemical facility anti-terrorism standards, the CFAT regulations, we were able to say, here's what we think about security. It becomes a blueprint for really discussions with DHS. We have a great relationship with DHS. DHS is constantly looking for opportunities to use our security code and our certification process to sort of streamline their regulatory and oversight process. We've also been able to strike arrangements with the Customs Agency through the CTPAT program. Responsible care companies get expedited treatment through CTPAT. So there's ways that you can use, your own voluntary program toward regulatory benefit. And the last piece on this slide is really important to our members. DHS has in statute, there's this program called the Safety Act. And it's meant to provide liability protection to users of anti-terrorism technology. And I think it was originally, enacted thinking about technologies. But we've kind of taken the broad definition of technology and said our security code is a technology that ACC has put into the market. Our members are using it. They ought to have liability protection for using it. So we've submitted an application to DHS for Safety Act protections, and it was just granted for the second time back in January. So it provides liability protection for all of our member companies that implement responsible care and partner companies if there's an attack on their facility, an attack on their material in transit, and ACC, as the owner of the technology, holds the liability up to our insurance cap. So hopefully we would never have to test this, and who knows how it would hold up in a court of law. But the ability for our companies to feel like they have some liability protection because of what they're doing voluntarily can be a powerful thing. The process safety code, I'll just say there are many pieces here. This, I think, is most akin to some of the things you're working on. This process safety code, you'll see it's kind of streamlined. Process safety best practices have been part of responsible care since the inception. But what we really wanted to do with this code was bring in best practice thinking. So we took the Baker Panel report, we took the Deepwater Horizon report and said, all right, what's in here that can bring our thinking to state of the art? You'll see leadership, accountability culture, some of the issues that I know you all really wrestled with, we've sort of brought into the program. Managing process safety distinct from occupational safety, having cultural surveys. As part of our auditing process, our auditors review and interview employees at all levels within the organization. So I mentioned like the CEO and sort of executive level interviews, but they go to line supervisors, floor workers as well, and interview them to get a sense of culture. And that's where this culture piece comes into play as they're doing that piece of the audit process. Element number 5 is comprehensive safety management system. That's sort of a huge piece, and lots of things fall into that bucket. But it's really meant to convey to our companies that you have to have a comprehensive system for managing product safety. And this last piece was really, I think, a challenge for us, but we finally got there, which is instituting and mandating leading indicators for process safety. Lagging indicators had always been part of our program, but for the first time with the institution of this code, we now require leading indicators. We don't subscribe exactly what. We sort of give a list and say pick what you think works for your organization, but you have to have them. The product safety code, I won't talk a lot about this either because I think it's really specific to the chemical industry, but I will say we see the program as providing important performance benefits, and this new code will do that in the area of product safety, but it also provides an opportunity for us to tell our story, to talk about what we're doing, the commitment that our industry is making to the safety of our products. This is a screenshot Congressman Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania hosted for us when we launched our product safety code, an event on Capitol Hill. We had legislators there. We had downstream trade associations on our panel. We had our CEO, Neil Hawkins from Dow, Bill Greiser, Procter & Gamble, Andy Hackman from the Toy Industry Association, and Terry Yossi, representative from an NGO, up there sort of talking about why the safety of chemical products are important, what this new product safety code is going to do for our industry. And it really helped, in fact, on the same day, completely not planned, but very fortuitous, Senators Vitter and Lautenberg announced their new piece of legislation to update the TSCA statute, which is the statute that really governs chemical safety and toxic substances. And ACC has been for reform of that statute for a long, long time. And so the fact that we were out there saying, look, we're not waiting, we're going to go ahead, we're going to move our program, we're going to do what we think is necessary on product safety, and we really hope Congress will follow along and update the statute. I mean, it's a kind of powerful tool to reinforce public policy positions as well. We do a lot with our data. As I mentioned before, we're able to kind of crunch the numbers that our companies report into us. We create talking points about improvement over time, sort of our contributions to safety, the environment, and we use these statistics all the time in our work as an organization. So to close, just a couple of key points, I think. A voluntary program provides an opportunity for an industry to tell its story. I really commend this group for sort of taking that step. I think this recommended practice is going to be a great avenue to tell that safety story. There's strength in numbers. Having an entire industry sort of saying, here's what we believe on a particular topic can go a long way and brings others along. I didn't mention this, but responsible care has its roots in Canada, began in '84, adopted in the U.S. in '88. There's now 63 countries that have responsible care programs. When you take a step, you can really lead others along. When you take a step as a group, you can lead others along. I mentioned lots of examples of how you can use your voluntary program in the public policy space, and it becomes, kind of a touchstone for how an industry really does its public policy work. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Deborah, thank you so much for that. We have about 5 minutes for questions, if anyone would like to approach the mic if you have a question. So, Carl. Yeah.
Good morning, Carl Weimer, the Pipeline Safety Trust. I really love the ACC Responsible Care Program. The third-party audits, the rolling out of public metrics is great. I recently intersected with responsible care in Canada, and there's one major difference between the Canadian program and in the U.S., and that's the way they involve the stakeholders around their plants. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you could talk to that difference a little bit and why that hasn't been incorporated in the U.S., and I was thinking about that as we talk about the pipeline SMS too.
Yeah, so ACC requires that companies have a stakeholder outreach program, that they go out and they talk to their communities, their major stakeholders. Some of our big branded companies, have large public stakeholder groups. Some of our smaller companies, their stakeholders are really their surrounding communities. So we give some leeway to our companies in defining who their stakeholders are. But they have to have an outreach program. They have to be able to document how they've thought that through. But the difference that you're talking about with Canada, we don't require that there's a public stakeholder as part of the certification process. Our auditing firms are hired in. Some companies, I would say 20% of our companies voluntarily do that. They'll bring in, a local official, a member of their community advisory panel, somebody who's on their public stakeholder board. But the majority of our companies do not. We've talked about that from time to time as we've retooled the program. But our companies felt like it sort of introduced too much variability into the audit process. They're also worried about confidential business information, sort of being divulged during the audit process, particularly in the area of security. So there's been, I think a healthy debate around it, but you're right, we haven't taken that step, and the Canadians certainly do.
Are there any other questions? We have time probably for one or two more. Go ahead.
I'm Bill Moody. I was a member of the SMS panel, still am. One of your comments that interested me was you were right. We argued a lot, not argued maybe, but discussed in detail role of senior management, commitment, leading on into safety culture. So keep it at that level. And I noticed that you had a headquarters certification. Could you maybe contrast a plant audit and a headquarters audit for us to kind of highlight that difference?
Sure. And our companies are really diverse, so each headquarters is different. Sometimes a headquarters is co-located with the facility, which, is a little bit different than a corporate headquarters that has no manufacturing around it. So each is different, but I would say the issues that are covered, the auditors, sometimes they start at the headquarters and then go down to the facilities. Sometimes they go to the facilities and then go to the headquarters. And depending on how that flow goes, if they've been at the facility, they'll kind of track back what they saw at the facility to corporate policy. Does it match? Does it line up? Is corporate management aware of what's going on at the facility? Is the direction set at corporate really being carried out at the facility? So they'll try to, sort of make those connections. But I'd say the issues that they focus on are more issues of culture, management, policy, commitment. Those are softer issues, but they try to get a feel for that by interviewing senior executives, testing their knowledge of their systems, testing their knowledge of policies. In terms of function, the functions that get greater emphasis at the headquarters, as I said, tend to be sort of logistics, corporate logistics, product safety. Lots of testing is sort of mandated out of the corporate office. So those functions, I think, get a heavier look at the headquarters level. But then again, sometimes a company will have a separate sort of logistics arm that operates completely separate from headquarters. So you never know. It kind of depends on each company sort of does its scoping and provides the auditor, here's what our organization looks like, here's where the functions reside, and the auditor really structures the certification process based on the functions that are there at the headquarters. But I think as a general matter, logistics, product safety are the issues that get the highest hit, along with culture, policy, senior leadership commitment.
I think we're at time, probably. Oh, Jeff, you have one more question?
Hi, Jeff Weiss, U.S. DOT. The committee's probably wincing right about now. One of the issues that we wrestled with, and it also carrying on Carl's theme between Canada and the U.S. was the issue about accountability, and you covered that. But the thing that we were wrestling with was establishment of an accountable officer. And that went back and forth and back and forth. And what do we mean by it? Does it have punitive implications, or is it the person who generates the continuous improvement? So I'd welcome any comments you have on that.
Yeah, I understand that there's some consternation about sort of being on the hook, but I feel like, we make officials from our company sign documents. We collect CEO signatures on the guiding principles. We also have what we call attestation statements that go along with the codes. So as we've rolled out these new codes, there's a 3-year implementation cycle. So starting end of this year, we're going to be collecting attestation statements from each company saying that they're making progress on the new codes in these specific areas. And we ask for the signature of what we call our executive contact. So it's the senior individual who's either on our board or is the officer, sort of the responsible party for the company, as well as that responsible care point of contact, because we want to make sure that they're on the same page, they're talking, they're both sort of aware of where they are in the organization. So we require them both to sort of sign on the dotted line. And, ACC is a pretty, I would say, risk-averse from a liability point of view organization. And, if we've been able to sort of work through that, I think most organizations could.
Well, thank you so much, Deborah. We really appreciate you being here today and taking the time.
Yes,
All right. So it's 10 o'clock, and unlike Jeff and Masood yesterday, we are actually going to give everybody a break. So we'll be back at 10:30. Thank you.